We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 18b. On the previous summit, there was a machlokus between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Let's say you have a Nazir who becomes Tameh. He goes through a 7-day purification process. According to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, on the 7th day, that's when he is able to start counting his new Nazirus term. And according to Rebbe, he has to actually wait until the 8th day. It's not enough to wait until the 7th day when he becomes pure. He has to wait till the 8th day when he brings the set of karbonos. And so the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, where does he learn out that already on the 7th day? Doesn't the pasuk seem to imply it's the 8th day, it's the time of the bringing of the karbonos? And to that, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, Bayom hahu lamali. What does the pasuk need to say the extra words Bayom hahu? Emeino inyan l'shmini. If those words are not referring to the 8th day, Taneyu inyan l'shvi. You should assume that they refer to the 7th day. Those extra words tell us that the Nazir begins his new count of Nazirus on the 7th day, the day of the purification. The Rebbe Nami Haksiv Bayom Hahu, and Rebbe also, what does he do with the words Bayom Hahu? Amar Lach Rebbe, so Rebbe will respond to you, Ahu Lahachi Uda'asa. The words Bayom Hahu are used for the following, Lomar Lach, to tell you, Afal Pi Shalohevi Karbonosov. Even though he doesn't bring his karbonos on the 8th day yet, but once the 8th day arrives, that's when he can begin counting his new term of Nazirus. And the Gemara continues, Rav Chisda maiduchke l'ukmek Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Chisda on the previous summit, what forced him to say that the Mishnah in Krisos follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda? Again, the Mishnah in Krisos said, let's say you have a situation of a Nazir who becomes Tameh, and he goes through the purification process, then he becomes Tameh again, and again he becomes Tameh. So the Mishnah said that he can bring one set of karbonos for all of those situations of Tumah. And Rav Chisda said that Mishnah is following Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that it's on the 7th day that the Nazir begins his new count. So the Mishnah is specifically talking in a situation where the 7th day arrives and he becomes pure and he becomes Tameh again. And so the point is, he hasn't reached the point in time yet when he was able to bring the karbonos, but he has reached the point in time where he was able to start a new count of Nazirus when he then became Tameh. So therefore, in such a situation, we're saying that he's able to bring one set of karbonos for everything. But Rav Chisda said you cannot say that the Mishnah follows the opinion of Rebbe, because according to Rebbe, if he became Tameh on the 7th day, that's not even a time of the new Nazirus, so it would all be considered one anyway. There would be no point to saying over there that it's multiple situations of Tumah. That would all be considered like one situation of Tumah. And if you're talking about on the 8th day when he becomes Tameh again, so on the 8th day it's already a time that's ro'i to bring the karbonos, so actually he would have to bring separate karbonos in such a situation. That's why Rav Chisda said that it can't follow Rebbe. But now the Gemara says Rav Chisda should have said as follows, Lukma kagon de nitma de chazia belel shmini v'Rebbe. Why didn't he say a situation where he became Tameh on the night of the 8th? Now on the night of the 8th, so that's a situation where really the karbonos cannot be brought, because they can't be brought at night, but it is already the night of the 8th, and therefore at that point in time, if you're saying that even if the karbonos were not brought, still you can start the new count, so it is a time for the new count, but not a time where it's roy to bring karbonos, so it actually could have been Rebbe if you're going to say that even though the karbonos are not actually brought, still the count of the Nazirus can begin. And so the Gemara says, Midalo mukim la Rebbe, from the fact that Rav Chisda did not say the Mishnah of Krisos is like Rebbe, so leima kasavar leilya lav mechusar zman, it would seem that Rebbe holds that night is not really considered mechusar zman in terms of the bringing of karbonos. It is considered to be the time of the bringing of the carbon, even though you can't technically bring the carbon at night. And Rashi says, Kagon dechazia belel shmini, he should have said the cases the person becomes Tameh on the night of the 8th. Kalomar de nitma belel shmini. Chazia means to say he became Tameh on the night of the 8th. V'hai damar dechazia, why is it using the word dechazia? Lav davka hachel aidi denakad la Meseches Krisos. Really, that word is not accurate over here, but since that word was used in Meseches Krisos, nakte lahacha, so we say it over here, we use that word here. V'chazar v'nitma belel shmini, but the point is, you can say according to Rebbe that the case is he purified himself, and then on the night of the 8th, he became Tameh again. The tumos harbeika, that is going to be considered multiple tumos, mikevan de nitma beleil ches, because already he's becoming Tameh on the night of the 8th, when really that's a time of a new Nazirus. V'chaylo aleh tahara, the purity has already been chal. Ve'eno chayiv alein ala carbon echad, and that would be a case where you're only going to be chayiv one carbon, because the nighttime is not a time that's roy lekarban lefi shadayin lo higia yom shmini. It's not yet the day of the 8th. Shahaisa shah haruuya lahavi bar carbon, which would have been a time that it would have been fit to bring a carbon. And the Gemara Gemara says, Umidelo mukim la Rav Chisda b'chiyai gavna, from the fact that Rav Chisda does not say that, v'aliba de Rebbe, he doesn't say that the Mishnah in Krisos is like Rebbe. Tifshat mina de islay la Rav Chisda d'layla lav mechusar zmanu. It would seem then that Rav Chisda holds that nighttime is not really a delayed time in terms of the carbon. It is considered a time of the carbon. Dim nitma b'leil shmini, meaning to say, let's say he became tamei on the 8th night, have a kinitma b'yom shmini. It's the same thing as becoming tamei on the 8th day. The nitma b'shah sheru'uya lahavi carbon. That's considered tamei at a time when it is fit to bring the carbon. Afagav de'eno karev arayom. Now, even though you're not actually going to bring the carbon until the daytime, damya halayla liyom. The night is considered comparable to the day. V'chayev carbon al kol achas v'achas. And in such a situation, you would be chayev a carbon on every single tumah independently, a different set of carbonas. And the Gemara answers, Amar Ravada Barava. Ravada Barava says, Ha b'ha. One thing is dependent on the other as follows. If you say that nighttime is considered mechusar zman, so emas michsi lekarbon, so when really is the time that it's fit to bring the carbon? Letzafra, it's only in the morning that you can bring the carbon, as we said. But if you're going to say that, then you'll also have to say nazirus nami lo chayla ad safra, that the new nazirus isn't chal until morning either. In which case, if the person became tamei on the night of the 8th, that would all be considered like one long tumah, because it's not the new time of nazirus yet. That new nazirus is not chal until the morning. And the other way around as well. V'yamrit leilya eino mechusar zman. If you're going to say that the nighttime is not mechusar zman, meaning to say that at night already it is considered a time that's fit to bring the carbon, so nazirus tahara chayla meorsa, so also that new nazirus is also chal at night. And what the Gemara means to say is, if in that case, if the person became tamei on the night of the 8th, that's really a time where it's already fit to bring the carbon in theory, and therefore that would be considered a case where you have to bring multiple carbonos, and that's why Rebbe cannot be the author of that Mishnah in Krisos. And Rashi over here explains, Diamrit l'Rebbe mechusar zman have emas mischazi lekarbon letzafra. If you say it's mechusar zman, then the carbon really can only be brought in the morning time. When nazirus tara nami lochayla letzafra, and that nazirus also will not start until the morning. Ve'ilkach kimitami b'leil shmini. Therefore, if you're going to say the case is when he became tamei on the night of the 8th, kula tuma arichti, that would all be considered one long tumah. It wouldn't be considered a case of multiple tumas, which the Mishnah in Krisos is addressing. Ve'les lach lamemer bu tumas harbe. You couldn't call that tumas harbe. Again, the Mishnah in Krisos said, by tumos harbe, you're going to bring one carbon. V'yamar del Rebbe eino mechusar zman. Now, if you're going to say that according to Rebbe, the nighttime is not mechusar zman, delayla nami zman hakrova, that the nighttime is a time of bringing the carbon, v'isbu tumos harbe, and so in that case, you're going to be saying that that is multiple tumos already. Nazirus tara nami chayla miorsa. But then again, that new nazirus is also chal at night. Everything is going to start at that night of the 8th. V'chayev carbon al kol tumah v'tumah, and you actually would be chayev an independent carbon on each tumah, an independent set of carbonas. Hilkach lo mesugma karevi klal. That's why it's impossible to say that the Mishnah in Krisos is like Rebbe. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Now the Rashi points out that this is not something we said above, and they changed the gears over here to Tanu Rabbanan. This is actually a Tosefta. Nitma b'shvi, let's say the person becomes tamei on the 7th day. In other words, the Nazir becomes tamei, goes through a purification process, on the 7th day becomes tamei again. The Chazar v'nitma b'shvi happens again, he becomes tamei on the 7th day of the purification process. So eino mevi ela carbon echad. He's only going to bring one carbon, meaning one set of carbonas for all of these different tumas. You just have to bring that one set. Nitma b'shmini, now let's say he becomes tamei on the 8th day. The Chazar v'nitma b'shmini, and again becomes tamei again on the 8th day. So in that situation already, it's considered that was a time that is fit to bring the carbon when he became tamei. So maybe carbon al kol echad v'echad. Then he's going to have to bring a carbon for every single tumah independently. And the Tosefta continues, Maschilu mona miyad, but on the 8th day, even if he doesn't yet bring his carbonos, he does begin counting his new naziros, divrei Rebbe Eliezer. This is the opinion of Rebbe Eliezer. And the Tosefta continues, V'chachamim omrim, and the Chachamim say, Carbon echad al hakol ad sheyavi chataso. He brings one carbon for everything so long as he hasn't brought his carbon chatos, meaning if he becomes tamei on the 8th day, before he brings the chatos, so then he brings one carbon for everything. But hevi chataso v'nitma, v'hevi chataso v'nitma. Let's say he brought his carbon chatos, then he became tamei. He brought his carbon chatos, then he became tamei. So then maybe carbon al kol echad v'echad. So then he has to bring an independent carbon for each tumah. And the Tosefta continues, Hevi chataso v'lo hevi ashamo. Let's say you have a situation where he brought his chatos, but he didn't bring the asham, mona, so at that point in time already, he can count the new Nazirus. Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, Omer, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, he says, Keshem shechataso ikafto, just like the chatos holds him back from beginning the new Nazirus, kein ashamo ma'akvo, so to the carbon asham, it stops him from counting the new Nazirus. He needs to bring the asham in order to begin his new Nazirus. And so the Gemara now continues and analyzes the three opinions in the Tosefta. B'shalom al Rabbi Eliezer, I understand according to the first opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Kra v'kidesh es rosho bayom ahu, the pasuk says he sanctifies himself on that day, meaning to say on the 8th day, Afal pi shelo hevi karbanosov, even though he did not bring his karbanos. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer, on the 8th day that starts the new Nazirus, and that starts regardless of whether he brought the karbanos or not, and that's also why on the 8th day, if he becomes tamei, that's already a time that is fit for karbanos, and it's also the time, the starting of the new Nazirus. So then at that point in time, he's going to have to bring a carbon for every single occurrence of Tumah. The Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan will say, Hahu afal pi shelo hevi ashamo. So the Rabbanan, they understand that what does it mean when it says Hahu? It doesn't mean to say even though he didn't bring his karbanos, but it excludes the carbon asham. Meaning to say, according to the Chachamim, it's the carbon chatos that determines when he starts his new Nazirus. Once he brings the carbon chatos, now the new Nazirus begins. But if he doesn't bring the carbon asham, that's irrelevant. The new Nazirus can begin even without the carbon asham. That's what's learned out from the pasuk of Bayom Ahu, means to say on that day, even without the carbon asham. Ela Rabbi Yishmael, but according to Rabbi Yishmael, because Rabbi Yishmael says the carbon chatos and the carbon asham are needed for him to start his new Nazirus. So the question on Rabbi Yishmael is, Hahu lamali, what does he do with this pasuk of Hahu? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Lach, Rabbi Yishmael will say to you, Hahu, you know what the word Hahu is for? Afal pi shelo hevi olaso. There's another carbon, the carbon ola. Even though he didn't bring his ola, still the count of the new Nazirus can begin. That's what the word Hahu comes to exclude. And the Gemara says, V'rabbanan ola lo boy miuta. But the Rabbanan say you don't even need a pasuk to exclude the carbon ola, because doron bi'almahu, because the carbon ola is just considered a mere gift, and therefore it is obvious that it's not going to be ma'akev. It's obvious it will not hold him back from counting the new Nazirus. And the Gemara continues, My time, Mayu de Rabbanon, what's the reason of the Rabbanon, referring to the Chachamim who say that it's the carbon chatos. When that carbon is brought, that's when he begins counting his new Nazirus, and not the carbon asham. The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, V'hizir la'Hashem es yimei nizro, v'hevi keves ben shanaso li asham. The pasuk says he begins the count of the Nazirus, and he brings this carbon asham. Ma Talmud lomar, what does the pasuk mean when it says this? L'fisha matzinu shekol asham shebatorah shehein ma'akvin. Because we find in all other situations the carbon asham is ma'akev. Rashi over here explains, Kolo hashama shebetor ma'akvin kedam rinon, like we say, hevi kaparaso ochel bekachim, he brings his atonement, he brings this carbon asham, and only then can he eat from the kachim. In general, a carbon asham is ma'akev. So yachol avzeh ma'akvo, I might think that's true over here by Nazirus also. The carbon asham is ma'akev, he can only begin the new Nazirus when he brings the carbon asham, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yotes Amud Aleph.